Good evening. On behalf of Paraclete Press, welcome to the first in a series of live talks on stability, helping us to find inner peace and stillness this Lent, right where we are. My name is Rachel McKendry. I'm the book publicist here at Paraclete. Thank you so much for joining us. Our conversation this evening is with Nathan Oates. Welcome, Nathan.
Thanks. Good to see you.
You too. Nathan is the author of Stability, How an Ancient Monastic Practice Can Restore Our Relationships, Churches, and Communities. Nathan's book was the inspiration for this series, and he's going to start us off this week with a conversation on stability and God, stability and self. A recording of our conversation tonight will be available later on our YouTube channel for anyone who couldn't join us. And of course, we'll also let you know how to get a copy of Nathan's book. Please take a moment to find the chat bar or the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we hope that you'll feel free to submit any questions that you might have for Nathan throughout our conversation this evening. And we'll hope to be able to get to everyone by the end of our hour together. We're so privileged during these crazy times to be able to meet with our many authors like Nathan, who's on the opposite coast from Paraclete. So great that we can use Zoom this way. So just by way of introduction, Nathan Oates writes, speaks, and serves as lead pastor of Emmaus Church Community, which he started with a few friends in 2004. For more than a decade, he has been captivated by the rule of Saint Benedict, focusing on how the Benedictine vow of stability can restore the North American church. Nathan holds a master's degree in spiritual formation from Wheaton College. He lives in Northern California with his wife, Carmen, his 3 kids, and a dog named True. That concludes our introduction for tonight. So Nathan, I'd love to hand things over to you. Nathan's going to share with us how he discovered the Benedictine vow of stability and how it can make a difference in our lives. Thanks, Nathan.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for joining us. It's weird to teach to a screen and not see people, but I learned how to do that a couple of years ago for the first time. So we'll just trust that everybody's there. And my prayer is that this is really helpful. I'm really grateful to be a part of this. So I was at a retreat house in Central California. I was on the coast and I was waiting for a ride, and I pulled out from this little tiny library in the retreat house. I pulled out this little red book, and I'd never heard of it before, The Rule of Saint Benedict. And I opened it up and I skipped the introduction, which I shouldn't have done because it's brilliant, the prologue. And I went right to the first chapter. I read the first sentence of the first chapter, and it was clearly there are 4 kinds of monks. And I was just so intrigued by that. I thought that was the greatest beginning to a book. And so I went on to read and found in this little book such a clear description of culture and the propensity in our culture to consume, of all things, including the church. I thought, man, who is this author who is diagnosing our culture with such clarity? I gotta find, and I was like resonating with his frustration. And I was like, man, maybe if he gets my frustration, maybe he'll propose a solution. Who is this? And I was really, frankly, I was totally surprised to find that it was written by an Italian monk in the 6th century. So I've been just compelled by this book and by this man for the last 10 or 15 years. And I've spent the last couple of years especially focusing on like learning the vow of stability. And I guess it's important for you to know that I'm a pastor, as Rachel said. And so the driving question behind my pursuit of this understanding is this: could the Benedictine vow of stability help the modern, dispersed Protestant Christian community do restorative work in our context? Like, can you take something of the beauty of what Benedict kind of wove into his community, and could we use that? Could that help us be more effective in transforming culture here? Totally different place, totally different side of the world, different context. So that's been the question that I've been pursuing, and then the book was kind of a reflection on the responses to that question. So I'll start with this. There is a great movie. I hope that you'll watch it. It came out maybe early 2000s. It's in French. It's called Of Gods and Men, and it tells the true story of these monks in Algeria during a time as the middle 90s, and the violence impacting the whole country, but specifically their region, is growing more and more intense. There are scenes that flash to the markets, people being killed by different warring terrorist groups. And the question that sort of serves as the conflict in the whole movie is, should we stay or should we go? Most people are saying you should just leave. And the monks are struggling because they have vowed to stay. They're monks that have vowed to remain there. And so at one critical point in the story, and I frankly thought that it was kind of Hollywood. I kind of imagined that somebody had sort of made up this poignant, powerful conversation. But then I read books about the event, including one that was published by Paraclete, and learned that actually this conversation happened. Here's the conversation. There's a few monks in a home of one of the local people, and one of the monks says, "We're thinking about leaving." And everybody kind of looks around like that's an alarming idea. And then another monk tries to sort of soften the news by saying, we don't know yet if we're going to stay or if we're going to go. We are like birds on a branch. We don't know if we're going to go or not. And then the camera moves to the face of this woman, and she looks at them and she says, "We are the birds and you are the branch. And if you leave, we lose our footing." I just thought that was such a powerful depiction of the effects of stability, which is something that I think we don't think about too often in many cases. The question is, should we stay or should we go? It's not about stability itself. It's actually about what stability enables, what stability fosters, what stability provides. In this case, in this monastery in this town in Algeria, that monastery, people even spoke of the monastic effect, or the monastery's effect on the village, because there wasn't crime happening right in the shadow of the monastery. So the stability of the monks was providing provision and protection and peace to the people of that village. So I would say this in terms of a clear and simple definition of stability, and this is just my working definition. Stability is an essential ingredient. It's an essential ingredient to work that lasts. It's almost impossible to do good, lasting work if you leave, whether that's the work of a parent or the work of civic restoration. An ingredient that seems to be critical in all cases is remaining. If you transplant a fruit tree once, it will still bear fruit. If you transplant it again, it might, but if you transplant it a third time, it's almost never going to produce any fruit. It just can't seem to recover. Its ability to be fruitful, in other words, seems to be ruined. In St. Benedict's context, which is ancient Rome, just after the collapse of Rome and the corruption of the church, Benedict's going to school in Rome. He's disgusted with what he sees. He takes off, lives in a cave in the wilderness, and soon people start to gather around him. Many of you know the story, but way better than me probably. In his context, stability meant living in a specific place with a specific and particular group of people for the rest of your life, according to this rule, the rule that he eventually writes, this way of living. What did he mean by stability? This place, these people, and this rule. So the way I try to teach it in my context is by committing to stability, we're committing to a particular people and a specific place, and we're doing so for a clear purpose, not just because stability is cool or it's countercultural, but because of the fruit that stability ultimately enables, which is the goal, which is what we're going for. So I'll quickly run through the first two chapters of the book that Paraclete published, and then we'll get into some questions. Rachel and I'll have a conversation. We'll open it up. So the first chapter is on stability and God. The theological root of stability, our stability, is the stability of God. God is always here. God is always good. God is always this faithful presence. So which isn't surprising. It's super basic, right? But this is the root of this conviction, this value, this practice, this vow. I was serving at a camp in Wisconsin many years ago, and I was talking to this college age kid, and he was super discouraged. And the reason he was discouraged is because he expected to encounter God in this place where people had encountered God for generations, but he hadn't, in his estimation. So he was going to leave, he said, and he was going to go find God at this other place in California. And what I found so sad about that story was that, and about his rationale, was that there was a flaw in his theology. And what was the flaw? The flaw was that God is somewhere else. That's the essential problem. That's the essential mistake in his mind. I can't experience God here. I must go somewhere else because that's where I'll find God. The theologians talk about the omnipresence of God, right? The omnipresence of God is both beautiful and challenging. It's beautiful because it means that wherever I go, God is there. Wherever I go, God is there. And gosh, we love the convenience of that. We love the dependability of that. We love the hope of that. Wherever I go, God's going to be there. That's why it's a beautiful truth. It's also a challenging truth, because what that means is if God is everywhere, then God is also here. And if I'm going to experience God somewhere else, I must be able to also experience God here. If I can't experience God here, why would I think I could experience him somewhere else? So now it becomes a very confrontational reality. The omnipresence of God is now not just this wonderful, I can go anywhere and experience God in the forest, on the beach, in the church, at my house. It means that, man, in this difficult place, right, in this difficult relationship, in this difficult ministry, in this difficult season of my life, this is also a place where I can encounter God. So you've got this concept of place here, and then you combine that with this relational concept of with, and that's this beautiful truth that God is always here with us. God is in this place. David says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me. And this truth gets reiterated and celebrated. And in some cases, it's like, it's kind of an awful truth. It's a terrifying truth. Like Jacob is an example in Genesis. He's manipulating the system. He's lied to his dad. He's stolen from his brother. He bolts. He gets tired. He falls asleep on the side of the road. He has this dream about stairway to heaven. He wakes up and he says, surely this is the house of God. And it sounds like this beautiful statement of praise, but it's not. He says he was afraid because he didn't think God was there. And that's the crazy recognition, is I didn't think you were here. Builds an altar to recognize I've had this experience with God in this place on the side of the road in Bethel. I mean, who would have thought, right? So the common question that I get when I talk about staying and the value of experiencing God right here, right now, is, but doesn't God call us to go? Isn't God always telling people to go? Paul to go, Abraham to go, the disciples, the Great Commission, everybody's being told to go all the time. And the short answer to that is yes, God does call people to go all the time. There's really two energies in Scripture. One of them is go into all the world, make disciples of all nations. It's this go, reach, preach, heal the world kind of energy. But there's also this idea of remaining and staying. There's lots of movement in the Bible, but I would argue that the movement that matters is movement that is born out of having not moved for a long time. Yes, the disciples are sent, they're commissioned to go into all nations, but they have been taught to stay with Jesus for the last 3 years. So there's a difference between movement that is leaving and movement that is being sent. It looks like the same. Like you see two people, one's leaving, one's being sent. You can't necessarily tell the difference, but the effect of their movement will be radically different. If you're leaving, you're basically like a restless wanderer. You're still looking for this hope. You're still looking for a purpose. That's the wanderer. That's the leaver. That's like, I'm not sure. That's like Moses running away from Egypt. I'm not sure. I don't know how to deal with this. I just killed a dude. I'm like, then you have then you have examples of people who are sent, and those are like missionaries. They have found hope. They have heard the voice of God, and now they're moving, but their movement is rooted in having not moved for a while. They are carrying with them a wisdom that can only be gained through having not moved, or we could say through stability. A priest at a monastery in Rome told me, a monk who was also a priest, he said, you need to stay somewhere long enough to unpack the reality and the ramifications of the omnipresence of God. So in other words, we got to take this out of a theology book, and it's just one of many attributes of God. He says you got to stay in a specific place long enough, and you got to stay with the specific people long enough. You got to stay committed to a specific purpose long enough to unpack the reality and the ramifications of the omnipresence of God. So the first chapter of the book is basically just establishing this theological foundation. There's, of course, lots of other doctrines that inform and fortify the vow of stability. But I think that the main one, or at least a main one, is the omnipresence of God. In chapter 2, we shift from stability in God to stability in self. And here's where we try to get really honest with this deep, discontented desire that is in all of us, which is this desire to leave. We are all essentially, at least in part, restless wanderers. Every good movie has a chase scene. Have you ever noticed that? Either there's like a rogue spy being pursued by a government agency, or maybe there's snarled traffic on a bridge and somebody gets out of the taxi and runs all the way across the bridge to the church to keep her from marrying the wrong dude. There's pursuit scenes, there's chase scenes. And I wonder if this isn't just a form of entertainment, but if there's something in the human experience that resonates with being pursued, with wanting to pursue or wanting to be pursued, maybe even something that resonates with not wanting to be caught, wanting to keep running. I've heard the Bible described as the story of God's relentless, God's relentless pursuit of humanity. So if that's the story, what's God doing in the story? He's pursuing us, right? And what are we doing? We're running. We're running. Maybe it's like full on running away from God. Maybe it's I'm just abandoning the whole thing. Or maybe it's not quite that dramatic, but it's sort of subtle. Maybe it's I'm running from deeper intimacy with God. Maybe it's I'm running from this truth that I just keep, being presented with this, and I need to confront it. I need to deal with it. I need to face it. Maybe I'm running from surrender. Maybe I'm running from a love that is sacrificial. Maybe I'm running from, there could be endless amount of things, but there's something broken in us that I think manifests itself most primally, if that's a word, primally, by our running. Yeah, we don't want to stay. Embracing stability is how we keep from running. That's how we stop. We embrace this value, and ultimately, perhaps we even take it to the place of a vow. Stability is how we stop running and how we allow ourselves to be found. So you could look at stability as the opposite of running. I found that few people have really thought about the word stability, probably because of where I'm coming from. I'm in a low church Protestant tradition, and so it's not a word that I think that we've used a lot. If you're part of a Benedictine tradition, of course, you use it all the time. But I actually think even if you're not familiar with the concept, or even if you really haven't used the word, one of my friends said, stability sounds like stagnation. I can't believe you're writing a book about stagnation. Some of us are just starting at zero on this, right? But so even if we can't quite get our heads wrapped around the value of stability, I think there's something in us that has a hard time refusing to recognize like the admirable quality of a 50-year marriage, like, wow, that's something special, right? Or the sacred, like, sense of a 1,000-year-old cathedral. It's different from the junior high where our church used to meet. It's just different than the cafeteria. There's something undeniable in most people's estimation about what is rendered from a long-term commitment to the same, in the same direction or to the same thing. It feels like, on the inverse of that, anything that is requiring a long-term commitment in our culture currently is on the decline. This is not something we're good at. And even if we have some ability to go, man, I really admire the way that guy stuck with his business for 30 years and it finally broke open and now he's a success. Or I really admire the pastor who just plowed into that little village for 20 years and now finally they're really making a difference. We admire it, and yet it feels like there's something in us that almost repudiates the value of stability itself. We don't want it. We don't want to do it. And I think it has to do with this desire to run. I spoke a couple minutes ago about Benedict's frustration. I think it's consumerism. He doesn't actually use the word. He talks about the gyrovag, the monk that basically just monastery shops. I mean, he just goes to the monastery, receives the hospitality that Christ would receive. And then when he's asked to do the dishes, he skips to the next monastery down the road and just kind of plays that game. I mean, Benedict uses really, really harsh language for the gyrovag. More detestable in all ways than the previous kind of monk that he describes. Benedict's solution to his frustration is stability. And he values the value of stability. He sees the value of stability as so important to the restoration of the church, to the forming of an actual functioning Christian community. So important. This is not an optional thing. Stability is so important. The drive to be a consumer is so deep in us that he makes the value a vow. So he requires monks to make a vow of stability upon the entrance into the community. And that says a lot. That says a lot. Vows imply struggle. That's why we start our marriages with a vow, because somebody wiser than us invites us to begin with a vow, because this is going to be hard. This is going to be a big challenge. It's going to require something of you that nothing has required of you before. And so make this vow, keep this vow. And then as you keep this vow, sooner or later, the vow begins to keep you. Monks make a lifetime vow of stability to their community. When I was visiting this monastery in Italy, I asked this monk about the vow of stability, and I expected him to give me this answer that was something like, yeah, for the rest of my life. But he said, sometimes stability is just what keeps me engaged through the hour of prayer. All right, I need to move along. Let me just give you a few quick images that help me with stability. Rachel, feel free to hop back in here if you like, whenever you're ready. Here's one. I was a catcher in high school. I played the position of catcher. This is back in the day when runners could blow the catcher out, could try to score by not just sliding, but by knocking the catcher over. And I actually, frankly, I really loved this because I was not a very good baseball player. I was a better football player than baseball player. And I learned that I could kind of alter the game a bit if I anticipated the contact and I stepped into it. If I received the throw from the outfield, tucked the ball, and then kind of like met the runner. Sometimes it feels like life is coming at us with 90 feet of momentum. And it's like, oh my gosh, somebody's calling me and I know this is going to be really rough. And we just don't want to deal with it. They've got all this momentum coming at me. I don't have any. And so the temptation is to avoid, to run. I need images that invite me to stay, to be here, and to take the assault of the bad news, the criticism, the challenging situations, and not run away from them. Benedict speaks in terms of embracing a little strictness. which enables you to basically hurt people less and love people more. The essential idea behind embracing strictness is being okay with enough, not constantly seeking for more, feeding this restlessness inside me for the next phone, the newest app, the best new car, whatever the thing is, but being okay, embracing a little strictness and saying, I'm going to limit it to this. I love Kathleen Norris's book, A Cloister Walk. My favorite story in this book, I think she's a part of the speaking series, which I cannot wait to hear it. She tells a story about making eggs in some ecumenical house. This monk walks in, just being hospitable. She says, how would you like your eggs? And he looks at her like he has no idea what she's talking about. And her response is, oh yeah. She tells in the book, she realizes nobody ever asks this guy how he wants his eggs because he's a monk. So he doesn't, it's not like a choice that he's given, apparently. So I love the idea that we could limit and quiet this yearning inside us to just be perpetually fed and instead reach a place of contentment. How? By embracing stability and not running. Paul says, I've learned the secret to being content in all situations, in all circumstances. And my question for Paul is like, how'd you learn that? How'd you learn that? And I think his answer is he stayed. He didn't bail out. Like he stayed. He stayed in the pain. He stayed and he didn't quit. And as he stayed, as he embraced stability, stayed with the people, right? Stayed with the purpose. He learned the secret. He learned that, what was it? That Christ was right there with him in it. And that was the source of the strength, even in the pain. So, yeah, the point is not ultimately to stay in a place. The point ultimately of stability, as Esther DeWall points out really beautifully, is stability of heart, to come to a place where I can stand holy before God, open before God, understanding he is always with me, I'm always with him. Everything I have is his and everything he has is mine. Esther DeWall says the place itself hardly matters. What this comes to then ultimately is the stability of heart.
Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you.
Lots of good comments coming in, which we will absolutely get to. I'd love to
Trying to ignore them. I was like, oh, that's a good question right there. We'll go back to that one.
Yeah, well, actually, maybe we should begin there. Pastor Peter and now Nancy are both pointing out that there are, of course, sometimes toxic or dangerous situations that really
Absolutely.
do require us to leave. And you talk about that in the book, Nathan.
I do. And you know what's interesting, Rachel, is everyone who's reviewed the book has noted that I made that little asterisk or what's the right word, like allowance.
Proviso, yeah.
And I think it's because it's really on people's minds. And I said it like 2 weeks ago in our church in a different context. I'm never encouraging to stay in a toxic relationship, abusive marriage, a manipulative work situation. So for sure, those who have made that observation, I'm not opposed to that. And I don't think others in the tradition would be either. Yeah, that's the devastating level of the brokenness that we're living in. And sometimes the healthy thing is absolutely to leave, for sure. Yeah,
it's true. I'd love to talk about some of the practicalities. You know, it's always so interesting to me that these monastic practices are coming back into such a place of prominence in Protestant circles, you know, in places where they might not have been shown up just due to the Benedictines are usually Catholic. But here we are in Lent talking about stability. And, you know, it's easy to run in so many ways. Movies, social media, addiction to a busy schedule, or feeling like we have to be somewhere, do something. And, you know, you talked about Benedict's recommendations for like a sort of stricter lifestyle. And there's so many ways you can do this, but Nathan, could you share some sort of practical ways, recommendations, on how we can quiet ourselves or bring ourselves in the moment to that place of stability so that we can actually be with God? As you said, we know he's with us, but how do
Right.
we do that? How do we be with him?
Yeah. I don't have a lot to offer that's better than like the classic disciplines. Fasting, just and it's probably a lot of us right now who are fasting, and I just don't know that you can really improve on this. There's an alertness, there's a slight edginess that comes. There's like a low grade discomfort that you're living with through Lent, right? As you just you're a little bit hungry all the time, or whatever the fast, or a little bit like distracted because you usually go to that and you're fasting that now, and so you're not going to go to that. And I just think that that telling your desires to quiet down is good, because it's going to help me to gain control over my passions, my desires. But it also has this beautiful other benefit, which is I'm just kind of generally more aware of God's presence. As I'm aware of my hunger, I'm aware of my need for him, and that need for him is what literally pulls me toward him. It's when I'm kind of fat and satisfied that I just forget, right? I'm not necessarily denying his presence, but I'm not consciously aware of his presence in the same way as when I'm grieving, or when I'm fasting, or when I'm in a 2 or 3 day season of solitude, which would be another practice, which I would totally recommend. Didn't discover till I'd almost burned out in ministry. And now it's like a lifeline. I just am really grateful for silence and for solitude. I think any kind of consistent rhythms or routines, those have been helpful for me, not in the sense that God will always reveal himself to you in the same way. We see Elijah apparently make this mistake where he seems to kind of follow what he expects God to do when he defeats the prophets of Baal. Do a big crazy thing again, maybe do something like you did with Moses on the same mountain. I'll go there. And God's response to Elisha is, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? I don't think it's a accusation. I think it's just a beautiful question, father to son, saying, hey, it's going to be different, right? But so given that, I am helped by reading my Bible at the same kitchen table in the morning, and by praying in the same place and using the same prayer books. There is a benefit to the rhythm and the routine, and it's almost like muscle memory in a way that kind of locks me back in. At least I'm in a place of receptivity to the love and the power of God. That could change if he directs it, but I think at least stereotypically, Protestants are slow to see the value of repetition, of rhythm and ritual. And those have been really helpful things in terms of my being able to encounter God.
I keep thinking about the one thing you point up in the book, which is that by March, a lot of gym memberships that were purchased at the beginning of the year end up getting canceled.
Yeah, right.
And
right.
For a lot of
it's about
us,
as long as we can go.
Yeah. So we start out with these great intentions of a new spiritual discipline, or, we plant our feet with stability. But what happens when you find yourself in a more challenging situation? How do you avoid the spiritual restlessness that says, like, okay, this isn't working, I better try something else? How do we start on that process of like growing those stability muscles for ourselves?
Yeah. Well, I think you're right that we want the quick fix. And I think it's really helpful to acknowledge that we're looking for the pill that fixes it, right? Just the automatic and instant. That's just how widespread our addiction to consumerism is, and how deeply it's soaked into even our spirituality. I also wonder if in some Protestant traditions, at least, we emphasize salvation by grace alone to the degree that we're almost suspicious of any active partnership in the spiritual formation process, and might even like resist a phrase like doing more challenging spiritual work to find inner peace or something like that. If we've limited our options to very active engagement, then the few things that remain for us to kind of break ourselves out of this deadened kind of state are to go to the conference, go to the worship thing, go to new school, go to a new town, go to a new church. In other words, some of us have learned very few ways, I think, to engage in our own spiritual formation process that don't involve going. And certainly there's a biblical influence in that, but there is There is so much value in staying. It's not as dramatic or sexy or novel. It doesn't sell. But gosh, the value of the routine and the ritual, and it takes a while, right? It takes a while to see the value of it, I think, but that's where the fruit comes from. So I just continually encourage people to stick with that. Yeah.
In the book, you quote Esther DeWall, who said, "In stability, there must be no evasion. It will not allow us to evade inner truth." And you talk about a season in your life when your son was diagnosed with leukemia.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, between your pain and his pain, you just wanted an escape. You talk about, watching a movie, anything. But and we have some questions coming in on the chat here about those difficulties that come from the outside too, not just the things inside in our own lives, but when someone is countering what you're going for. So what advice do you give people facing those really hard situations, whether it's from within or from without?
Yeah. What I needed in our most challenging season was a stability. Was a spirituality that was powerful and practical enough to make a difference in the pain. Okay. I didn't need a spirituality that would bring me peace after the pain was done. After the pain was done, I'm fine, right? I need a spirituality that is potent enough to make a difference in the middle of the pain. And the only way to learn that, the only way to experience that is to stay in the pain. I wish that there was a less challenging response, but I won't give that counsel to anyone because it is an impotent counterfeit solution. I've experienced enough pain that I just simply refuse to say, you know what, just avoid it. It'll be over soon. It's going to be okay later. It won't. The tragedy is when people are in deep pain and all of their energy is going into trying to avoid the pain. And I'm not saying God causes pain because he has something specific to teach you. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that there are certain things that can only be learned in the pain. And so it would be poor pastoral care to say anything that encourages somebody to try to avoid or deaden or medicate. I don't mean to say that a walk, a rest, even a movie, some kind of a break isn't helpful. But I think it's very interesting that when we were in like a day-to-day battle, occasionally I would leave a hospital, I'd walk to a coffee shop, I'd buy this thing called the Bowl of Souls, this beautiful chamomile tea with cinnamon, and it's beautiful. And I would take like 45 minutes and I would just basically try to breathe and drink this tea. And I would come back ready. I would come back with, I was blitzed, but I would come back with a little bit of, okay, I can do this again. I can do this for another couple hours. As opposed to jumping into a 3-hour movie. Why did we do that? Because our story was so hard, we didn't want to stay in it. We wanted to get in somebody else's story. But here, Rachel, was the dreadful thing that would happen. As that movie started to wind up, and I started to remember, oh, this was just a movie. And I started to re-enter the reality of my life. It was almost like I was grieving again that this was my life. In other words, it was a temporary break, but it didn't restore me. It didn't help me. Does that make sense? It was just a temporary avoidance. We do this with medication, with alcohol, all sorts of things, right? So that's probably way too long of an answer. But what I'm hoping to try to say is that to those who are, whether from the inside or the outside, and clearly, oh my gosh, we need so much counsel here. We need the community of the church so that we don't think that God's calling us to stay into some really unhealthy situation. But here's the bottom line for me. St. Augustine says this, he's confessing and he feels like he hears Jesus say back to him, I was within you and you were not at home. Oh my gosh. That's, I don't want God to say that to me. Like, I don't want him to be with me and I'm avoiding me, and in avoiding myself and the reality of my presence, that I'm not receiving the what I need to from God.
Yeah. Well, that sort of takes us to, another thing you talk about in the book, just is about being present.
Yeah.
Being with God. And just as bad as a movie, I think, is either looking in the rear view mirror at things that have happened, or trying to figure out what's going to happen next. Worrying about the future. I've got an 18-year-old who's about to graduate, and she's got a lot of questions, and those of us who are in our 40s, or people looking to retirement, or people wondering what is their vocation. How do we remember that the here and now is where we can be with God?
Yeah, you just said it. I think I wish I would have learned that earlier. It's probably one of the most life-changing and practical truths that I learned from my spiritual director, which is that the only place I can experience God is right here, right now. God is everywhere, right? I am only here. God is every when. He's eternally present to the past and the future. He's every when. I am only now. He's everywhere, everyone. I can only encounter God right where I am right now. And so I just must. I cannot escape this moment. I can't escape this. This is for two reasons. One, this is the only time and place I can be with God, is right here and right now. Mm-hmm. And then this is the thing that just moved the needle for me, Rachel, was when my spiritual director helped me to see this, that everything I need to heal from the past, and everything I need to be prepared and strong enough for the future, I can only receive from God right here, right now. It's just a life changer for me, because I was really dipping into a dreadful outlook on life. I was just dreading, right? Hard things happening. And then one day I was like, oh my gosh, more hard things are going to happen when this one's done. And it was almost suffocating. So yeah, whatever it takes to be able to be here and now, and not living in the memories or in the daydreams, but really here and now. What a gift that we have. Love to just, I talk about that for a long time. I think that's the magic. Being able to be present to God in this moment, in this place, in this context, in this challenge, right?
Yeah. Nathan, David Timms has a good question. He's asking, how do we embrace stability in organizations, churches, or communities that do not? Does this stability simply wound us with disappointed hopes or conflicting values more than help us? And is that a legitimate time to move on rather than run?
Yeah, what a great question. Well, I don't know. I don't know, David. Here's what comes to mind. There are some who seem to be called to restore organizations from within. And to those, I would say, you stay, right? You have to. That's the only way that's going to happen. And others feel like they're called to not fight the same battles and try to paint the ship the same color it's been painted since 1860. And they're going to go start their own thing. And I think that God leads both. But so one thing that I think would be critical to consider, two things. One is agenda harmony. Am I just going to be running up against a different vision my entire time? That's probably going to be frustrating and futile. In other words, at one point when I felt like God was giving me vision for a church, but I was a youth pastor. I felt like the honorable thing to do was to leave, because, and I had to wait for an invitation. So there was still a measure of stability there, or at least of submission. But what was the alternative? To try to like break through the ceiling or buck the system or step out of my place. So one thing would be, I think, agenda harmony. The other thing that I was going to mention is, I lost it. Let's see, where's his question again? Oh, yes. So he asks about, is it a legitimate time to move on rather than run? And I'm sure I have a tendency to speak in extremes. There are ways to leave that aren't running, right? So you could move on and it could be a healthy thing. But I would hope that anyone who moves on would have stayed long enough that they've gained some real wisdom that they now can take with them to the next place. In other words, if you're a serial move oner, then I don't think you're really going to improve the next place you're going. But that's a great question. Clearly, these topics are so complex in some ways, and yet even a child can understand them on a basic level.
Nathan, John Paul is asking about the differences between faithfulness and stability. He says stability is a bit more horizontal, which is interesting. Jean Paul, if you have more to say about that, please feel free. But what's your thought about that?
Yeah, I saw that one. You know, John Paul, I wondered when I was working on the first chapter, which is the kind of like the theological grounding, if the stability of God was the right way to put it, or if the faithfulness of God was the right way to put it. So maybe those are interchangeable. Maybe there's a dynamic there that I'm not fully aware of or need to learn more about. I do feel like stability is a great word and value for the vertical because of this restless wanderer that is inside of me that wants to run. I don't just want to run from my kids. I want to run from God sometimes, like prone to wander. Yes, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. So here's my heart. So I feel like there's this vertical piece to that. I can definitely see how stability is horizontal, if by that you mean more like relational with people, social engagement. That's what's interesting. That's what's most interesting about stability to me is I think, and this is where the book I wrote points, is I think that stability is the way we can change the world. I think the way we can restore this town where we serve is to stay here. Stability is one of the things that I have to offer, having pastored in this town for 17 years. So the horizontal is frankly the really attractive part for me. And it's only recently been something that I've considered as part of maybe the vertical relationship that I have with God. I would more naturally see that as the faithfulness of God, the grace of God, the obedience of Nathan, the submission of Nathan. I hope that's helpful.
I think so. You know, earlier you mentioned Kathleen Norris, and when you were retelling the story of the monks of Tiberine and the story about the conversation with the birds in the branch, reminds me of what you're saying now too. And Kathleen's here tonight, and she commented, our pastor asked us to consider what our neighborhood would miss if we weren't there. And even though we'd been there for over 100 years, this helped us to be a better branch. So it's so helpful to think of that stability in terms of the horizontal, like you're saying.
Absolutely. And that's a great diagnostic question for the church, isn't it? What would happen if we leave? Would the church even, or the city even miss us? Who would miss us? I love that question. Yeah. Is she next week or 2 weeks?
She's next week.
All right, I can't wait.
With Mike O'Brien. Yeah, that'll be another great talk. Jennifer's question sort of ties in with David. She says, I do believe that stability of heart is what gives us strength for all trials, and yet so much of our culture throws out this gift unknowingly, she says, by seeing stability as stagnant, which is completely different. Keeping stability in our hearts is met with criticism by others who can't see the benefit of remaining constant.
Right. I know. I appreciate that, Jennifer. Here's an image that I have found helpful for me. Do we have time for a quick story?
Yeah.
Okay. So we spend a lot of time at the American River. It's close by our house and it's beautiful. And on our days off, we like to go there. And when I was younger and my kids were little, sometimes I would go out into the middle of the river, which is maybe like 2-3 lanes of traffic wide. and I would get out there in the middle of the river so that I could help my kids cross the river. And so it's really an interesting image, because like waist and up or chest and up, I look like I'm doing nothing. I look totally stagnant, right? I look like I'm doing nothing, but under the water, it is taking every ounce of my strength. My toes are like wrapping around river rock. I am leaning towards the current. I am actively working to be a stable presence so that I can serve others and that others can benefit from my stability in the form of safety, right? So from one vantage point, somebody like some dude on the side of the river would see somebody going down the river in a raft and say, that person's doing something, but that person's not doing something. They're just going with the current. They're just going with culture. The person who's actually doing something is the person who is working to be stable. And yeah, like I said, it's very hard to say stability is so much fun. But what I've had a lot of fun doing is entering conversations with people going, can you point to something that is the result of stability, somebody else's stability that you actually have benefited from? Financial stability because of your parents, or relational stability because your parents worked through it and they stayed together, or whatever. And that has started to spark, I think, a little bit more of an appreciation, at least, for stability as an intentional, active, loving commitment.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of people really resonate with that image. Thanks. Here's a question from Lee, Nathan. Lee says, please describe the differences between integrity, consistency, and stability.
I think that I'm sure others could do this way better than I. Let me say it like this. I think the unique thing about stability is that it engages the difficult, whereas consistency and integrity may also be called to do that. But I can be full of integrity, and I can also be consistent while avoiding difficult things. I think I can do that. I think I can in other words, I can consistently run a 7-mile loop that is flat. I can, with integrity, that's a silly example. I was gonna say, I can just eat all the foods that I like to eat. That's probably way simpler. I'm sure there's a real life situation that's difficult that would actually be helpful if I could articulate a distinction. But what's unique to me about stability is that when everything in me says that direction is hard, you should go the other way, stability is what calls me forward into that hard thing. Stability is what invites me to be, and it invites and it enables as I develop the practice, right? It invites me into, kind of like that catcher image, to step into the pain and not just to see it like, well, I could go pain direction or I could avoid pain. Either one, there's no necessarily like a better way. I would say in certain situations, the virtuous way involves some pain, and I willingly accept that, not because I'm a masochist, but because I value the fruit of stability, even if that means I got to go through a painful thing. So anyway, that's what's on top of my mind on that, brother. Yeah. I hope that was helpful.
John Paul says, you might be naming the virtues that inform stability, and David says stability can enhance integrity.
Yeah, for sure. I can see that. Yeah, I can see that. You know what? That's a great question to answer. Oh shoot, you should ask the questions, Rachel.
You're scanning through them too.
I am.
Good. Yeah, Pastor Peter says, God's steadfast love seems to me the root of what Nathan is talking about. Absolutely.
Is he the one that said Hesed?
Yeah, Hesed, yep. Yeah, so, okay, Nancy's question. Would Benedict say we should always step into the pain?
I know. Okay, great question. Now, there's only one source of information about Benedict, I'm told. It's Gregory the Great's biography, right? Benedict leaves. It killed me when I read it. at one point there's so much adversity around him, and it's perverted in nature, and he just wants to avoid the conflict with another priest, a rival priest, as I understand it. And he takes some of his monks and they just kind of relocate, I think, to avoid unnecessary, and it is, ecclesiastical conflict. So maybe there's an honorable way to say, you're picking a fight with me, I'm going to gracefully bow out for a higher purpose and not necessarily lean into the pain. I would say though, well, Nancy, at least in our case, pain found us. So I didn't, my choices were more simple in the sense that I either straight up avoided the pain, which would mean for me to avoid reality, or I leaned into it because pain found me. I think pain usually finds us. I don't know that many of us go looking for it, but.
Yeah. True. Thank you. I'm trying to scroll through here to see if I've missed anything. Well, David says, Nathan, your wisdom inspires me to deeper stability of heart and place. Thank you for your stories and personal example of stability. This has been rich.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
We do have time for one more question. If I'm going to start to wrap up our time together here, but if anyone has another burning question, please feel free to put it in the chat bar now. And I'll just take a moment. I'm sure many of you know this already, but I'll just hold it up. Here's Nathan's book, Stability. And at Paraclete, we'll always encourage you to go to your local bookseller first. But it's available everywhere. And if you would like to purchase a copy, or if you would like copies for your book club, we always offer multiple copy discounts from the Paraclete Press website. And for all of you who are joining us tonight, you can use the coupon code STABILITY for a 20% discount. So we'd love to make this book available to all of you. It's a real treasure. Thank you so much, Nathan, for being our first guest in this Lenten series on stability. It's been wonderful to talk with you. Thank you to all of you who joined us. And just to make sure everyone knows, as we talked about a little bit, next week, March 16th, we will be speaking with Michael Patrick O'Brien. He's the author of a fantastic book called Monastery Mornings. He's from Utah and essentially ended up being raised by Trappist monks up in the mountains there. So that's a fantastic story. And he'll be in conversation with Kathleen Norris. And the subject is stability for non-monks. Then on March 23rd, Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove, he's the author of The Wisdom of Stability, will be with us for a conversation on stability and growth. And then later on in Lent, on April 6th, we'll have Father Ron Rolheiser with us, and he's written a fantastic little book called Domestic Monastery. It shows how, life at home is just as valid as life in the monastery. It's an encouraging, practical little book. And so the subject of that talk is stability and the family. So thank you again so much, Nathan. Thank you for this book. Thank you for talking with us. Thanks to all of you for being here. And we pray for a blessed Lent for all of you. We hope to see you again. God bless you and have a great evening.
Amen. Thank you.
Take care.